we are. Josie, lovely to see you. Thank you for giving the time to be with us this evening, as you have a number of times in Bangor before we officially have you here. How is Oxford this evening?
It's very good, yes. Sorry I was a bit late, but Evensong overran. The Old Testament lesson was very long. But Oxford is good. It's very sunny and yes, lovely. It looks like, is it sunny there as well?
It's wonderfully sunny in Bangor. I was even found myself apologising to some people who were at the cathedral yesterday at the 11 o'clock to kind of say, Bangor isn't always like this. Don't get too excited. But it has
been nice every time I visited so far.
Well, brace yourself. I think, or even for August, as I ought to say. Rosie, we're going to kind of canter through life and talk a bit about God as we do. So I think my first question in these conversations tends to be a kind of let's begin at the beginning. Tell us about your childhood, kind of a very kind of North Wales question. Who are your family? Where are you from?
I grew up near High Wycombe, so it's sort of halfway between London and Oxford. My family, one side of my family are originally from South Wales, near Swansea. So I spent lots of holidays as a child in the South Wales and Swansea and in Pembrokeshire. But yes, lived in High Wycombe, did a lot of music as a child, got very interested in bell ringing and church bells. And yes, all sorts of music, particularly musical theatre, but all sorts of things. And then when I left school, I moved to London for university and studied music there. And then from there, I came to Oxford, where I've been for 3 years training at St Stephen's House.
I'm one of those people who would probably rather have needles inserted in my eyeballs as I look at paint drying than spend time bell ringing. I've never understood the appeal. So tell us a bit about what got you into bell ringing and what keeps you undertaking this miserable pastime.
Well, I started it just because someone said, do you want to have a go? And it looked quite fun, and I got to go up the tower at church, which people weren't usually allowed to do. And I wasn't quite sure about it to start with. It was quite fun, but I couldn't necessarily see what the point was. And I came quite close to giving up. So I started learning when I was 16. And I came quite close to giving up when I left to go to university, which is apparently what a lot of people do. That's the main age where people drop out. But I didn't give up, and when I went to London, I joined the University of London Society of Change Ringers and discovered that there were ringers my own age, and there's a whole community of bell ringers across the country and to some extent across the world. And I really like the combination of the mental and physical elements of it. When you're doing a long piece of ringing, you can get into a kind of almost meditative state. And it's quite fun to be controlling a massive lump of metal. And also you get to do quite a lot of cool things. So I rung at St Margaret's, Westminster on New Year's Eve last year and got to watch the fireworks from the roof of the tower, which was really cool. And there have been lots of interesting bits of ringing recently. I was out of the country for the Queen's funeral actually, but for the coronation we rang Great Tom at Christchurch Cathedral in Oxford, which weighs 6¼ tons, I think. So quite heavy.
I'm interested in the meditative, almost devotional aspect. I was going to ask do you think that's a common thing that bell ringers get into? Is it a kind of almost rosary-like Jesus prayer moment for people?
I think some people don't realise that that's what it is. So ringers are a whole mixture of some are Christians, some are not, some are other faiths. Obviously, it almost always takes place in a church, or at least in a tower sort of vaguely attached to a church. And I think, yeah, for some people there's a directly spiritual element to it that they kind of understand, and I think I get that. But I think everyone who's done long pieces of ringing, so we ring what's called a peal, which lasts about at least 3 hours, and in that you get into that state where you lose track of time, and you don't know how long you've been ringing for until you look at the clock, and you can be ringing something that's actually very complicated. It's a bit like something like riding a bike, where you don't you're doing something quite complicated, but you don't have to think about it when you get sort of in the zone.
We're very lucky here to have the music department at the university as a neighbour to us, and quite a few of our choral scholars are music students, and I'm conscious that some of them are driven by a delight in performing. Other people are more composition types, and there'll be some historians in there as well. What fired you up when you were doing your undergraduate music degree at King's?
I chose music to study at university because I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, and I liked music. And music was I always had this feeling that it was the backup plan, but I wasn't quite sure what it was the backup plan to. Turns out it was this. So it's always been something that I've done for fun. I've never been quite sure where it's leading, so I've never been particularly focused on performance or composition or anything else, but as I said, I really like musical theatre, and I like sacred music, and the reason I chose I was at King's College London, and the reason I chose there was because their music course covered a very wide range of musical styles, and periods and genres and composers, etc.
I suppose that a kind of a biographical look back for people now, I should be asking a question. What was the pandemic like for you? When in the course of life did that hit, and how did it change your plans?
So it hit at the end of my third year at King's, so I was just finishing off my first degree. It changed. So, and also alongside my third year there, I was working as a pastoral assistant at Christchurch on the Isle of Dogs. So it affected both of those things. Obviously, the church stuff moved online. I moved back home, moved in with my parents again, but could still do the pastoral assistant stuff online. It didn't really affect the university experience in terms of the teaching, which had pretty much finished. I think we lost the last 2 weeks of lectures. It definitely affected the writing up of all of the essays and things, and I had to change my dissertation, which was it was about bell ringing, but it was supposed to be about how it was about the movement of bell ringers and how they congregate in certain cities and things, and then they stopped. Well, moving became illegal, so it ended up. It was still on bell ringing, but it was about how the ringing community moved online. I think it was called "A Bell's Not a Bell Till You Ring It." Something about the ringing community moving online during the pandemic.
Yes, I think that kind of the titles of masters, doctorates, dissertations are always one of the more fun things about them. So yes, something before the COVID. And then the boring bits. You did all of your vocational discerning for the priesthood in a very neat and organised way during your undergraduate years. Tell us about your developing sense of call to ordained ministry and what that selection process was like for you in London.
Yes, so I first felt called to ministry when I was 14 and was singing in the choir at an ordination for someone from my church, and sort of ignored it at the time, didn't really understand it, and didn't really know what it meant, and sort of thought that's something to come back to in the future, and I suppose could quite easily have kind of forgotten about it for a lot longer. But when I moved to London, partly through the bell ringing, I ended up worshipping at a lot of different churches, and whereas through my childhood I'd always worshipped at the same church, I suddenly discovered that other churches are available, and so was worshipping in a range of churches in a range of different traditions, and the sense of calling started coming back around that time. And so I started meeting with a vocations advisor and the director of Ordinance, and had the whole series of meetings, and it was recommended that I should spend a year as a pastoral assistant, and at the same time I was looking for accommodation for my third year of uni, and someone had the clever idea that if I was a pastoral assistant, I could live in a house with other pastoral assistants and do some work for the church alongside the third year of my degree. And I had originally intended to do another year of that, but then when COVID started happening and no one was taking applications for the next year, I thought, well, if I can't do that, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do for the next year. So I'll push on with the discernment process and trying to get to a bishop's advisory panel that year, and then yes, ended up here.
I'm very envious of you for having spent the last 3 years at Oxford, which is such a lovely place. How has it been for you? Well,
yes, so of course COVID continued when I moved here without ever having visited. I didn't get to visit any theological colleges while I was trying to choose, so I did it entirely based on their websites and talking to people on Zoom. And yes, when I first moved here, which was October 2020, it was obviously all masks and groups of 6, and we had to wear masks around the college everywhere outside our rooms, and all the lectures were online and everything like that. So it was a very strange experience to start with, and it was and then the second term we weren't here at all in that lockdown, and so it's been really nice throughout last year to gradually get back to normal, and this year has been completely normal for us. I love being in Oxford. I already had some friends here, but have really enjoyed my time in the college, but also all the other things that Oxford has to offer in other colleges and chaplaincies, and lots of good placement opportunities. I've been on placement at Merton College for the last 2 terms, which has been really fun.
A very fine college. When I did my pre-ordination training, I did my placement in Llandudno, which is obviously a very lovely place. But you got to do some of yours in New York. How did that come about, and what was that like?
So for those of us that do 3 years of training rather than 2, we get 2 of the long summer placement, and so often they send us on a something sort of normal for the first one, and then something a bit more fun or exciting for the second one. So for my first one, I went to a post-industrial sort of ex-mining village in Derbyshire, and then in my second year, yes, the principal of my college called me into his office, and I sort of thought, what have I done now? And he said, would you like to go to New York? And yes. So yeah, I was there for a month, had a really, really amazing time, and yes, met all sorts of exciting people, and also the I think it was 2 days after I got there, the Queen died, so I was involved because I was at St Thomas's Fifth Avenue, which is very much like the English church in New York, and so they held a huge memorial service, which all of the dignitaries and things came to. So that was really exciting to be involved in, and I mean, it's just so different to anything I've ever come across in England. I think someone there described it as a medium-sized non-profit, and I think that's not inaccurate. Not in a bad way. It just is. That's sort of the size of it. So yeah, completely different to anything I've experienced before, but really exciting.
Tell me about theology. These last 3 years, you've had time to study and to reflect, and some of that will have been driven by academic curriculum and by those demands. But what's fired you up? What's interested you in terms of your doctrinal, scriptural, ethical studies? What's made you most excited theologically?
I don't want to keep talking about bells, which is what I wrote my dissertation on. Let me think of something else. What I most enjoy about being at St Stephen's is the conversations about theology that happen over breakfast or over coffee, but rather than formally in a sort of lecture or tutorial setting. We had a whole week where we were continuing this conversation at breakfast about what would happen if Jesus were a twin, which then moved on to when do identical twins get two souls? Do they always have two souls, or is it when it splits? Or the following week, the breakfast conversation was about whether crocodiles can walk upstairs, though. So it's not always that theological.
Can they? They can't, can they?
I think we decided that they probably can, but maybe can't get back down. I think, is that true of cows? I think they can walk upstairs, but can't walk down because of the way their legs bend. I'm not sure that that's true. I've heard that.
But just you wait until you see the high street in Bangor on a Saturday night, and you'll be able to test these things in a comprehensive manner. I want to ask you about one of the dynamics at St Stephen's, which is that it was always to me the college to which people who are opposed to the ordination of women would go and train in England, and I'm conscious that that's still a part of the college's life and its place within the life of the church. And I know that some of your colleagues there, some of the people who you're training with, and some of the people who've been mentoring you, are people whose theological position is not to affirm the ordination of women within the life of the church. And I have admired your not even your resilience, but your normalcy in the midst of what must at times be a challenging circumstance. How have you made sense of that in your time there?
Yes, I think the question I've been asked most often in the last 3 years is, what's it like being a woman at St Stephen's House, or variations on that. I think people assume that that because obviously it is a big issue. People assume that it's something that must be kind of coming up constantly in conversation here, and whereas actually we all disagree on, everyone at St Stephen's, everyone in the church disagrees on a whole range of things, and agree with some people and on some things and disagree with them on other things, and so there's lots of things that where I agree with the other people here, that I wouldn't agree with people at a different theological college, and the ordination of women is just one of those things. And obviously it is something that the church is still talking about and debating, so it's good to be able to have those debates, but yeah, it's really not something that I think people assume that the men at St Stephen's must be constantly telling us that we're not allowed to be here and sort of trying to throw us out of the door, which is just not what it's like at all. No one's ever told me that I shouldn't be here, and actually it's not, while we're all ordinands, it's not really an issue, because they even if someone thinks that I can't be a priest, I'm not a priest at the moment, so it doesn't really matter, and we're all sort of we're all equals here. I have heard from some women who trained here that they felt, after being ordained, coming back here, they felt different, and because people then don't think that they are ordained. So you'll have to ask me again after the 1st of July.
I should say for the record that it was we're very grateful for your hospitality at St Stephen's a few weeks ago. It was nice to be there, but to spend a tiny bit of time flying the flag for Church and Wales and for the ordination of women in post and annual conversations as well. But you're coming to Wales, you're coming to Northwest Wales. It's a big change. What are you excited about, and what are you scared about? I love the area. I've spent a few holidays in that sort of area. I hadn't been to Bangor itself before, but yeah, lots of holidays nearby. And I love walking, so I'm looking forward to that. I'm quite nervous about moving so far away from friends and family, and bells. If we come back to bells again, you don't have very many of them, but yeah, I am excited about it, and about coming to a new place and meeting new people and getting to know you all. We're looking forward immensely to having you.